Hey, this is Jonathan Gilliam. Before I start the podcast, I just want to tell everybody that if you have children or if you have friends that have children, make sure you go get the book, The Adventures of Team Little Bigs, a parent's book for children, because right now, one, you have plenty of time, and two, you don't want to go another day without developing communication and awareness and safety between you and your child. See, what makes this book different is that each picture that's in the book is actually filled with lessons about safety and awareness. And the parent, you can go and get the lesson plans at teamlittlebigs.com. You take those lessons that have been built from tragedy and research and all these things that have happened, and it allows you a structured way to build this relationship with your children and the awareness inside of them. The Adventures of Team Little Bigs, a parent's book for children, and the accompanying website, teamlittlebigs.com. Go get it. This is Jonathan Gilliam back on The Experts, and everybody's been wondering where I've been. Well, I'll tell you where. After all the coaching on this show with Dr. Michael Lucarini to everybody about how to stay virus-free and keep your groceries disinfected and your shoes off when you're in the house and your mask and your gloves and all these different things that we talked about, well, in an instant, I got the virus. And how I got the virus, sometimes it's just inescapable what happens. And you can prepare and you can do everything you can to keep yourself from getting something or staying clean. But when you're talking about a virus, it's very difficult when certain circumstances happen. Now, I keep my private life private, so there's going to be a limited amount of stuff I tell about this. You know, why do I keep my private life so private? Well, I mean, there's the death threats, like from the immigrant from Somalia that was a Marine several years ago after he heard me say something on CNN that he didn't like. So he said that he wished that or hoped that if I have a wife, that my wife and daughters would be raped and beheaded in front of me. That was an interesting one. And besides the fact that, you know, I'm a private person. So, and if any of you were ever in media the way I am, you should probably do the same thing and keep yourself in this day and age with the crazies that are out there. And the other thing is with the laws the way they are, you can't really defend yourself without, like, especially in the state of New York, without being brought up on homicide charges. Even if you are legal to carry a weapon and somebody's trying to kill you, you're still going to be brought up on homicide charges until you're cleared. So that's, those are the reasons why I keep my life private. So what happened? Well, I did put this on social media. I moved out of my apartment in Manhattan, and there's many reasons why. I've been wanting to get out of there for a long time. The prices were going higher and higher. $23, $25 was the last rent that I had. In living on the Upper West Side, Manhattan. That was for a 500 square foot apartment. And I lived there for 15 years, believe it or not, all through my time in the FBI. And then when I got out in media and stuff, and I travel so much that it just wasn't worth paying that high rent. I mean, you literally can have a house in other states. Arkansas, you could have a house on the lake and your mortgage would be, $1,200 a month. So it just didn't make any sense. Anyway, for now I'm in Long Island, and who would have thought that the epicenter of the virus would have gone from, well, we all knew it was going to be a big city, probably Manhattan at the time. That's one of the reasons why I got out of there. And let me just tell you this. When I moved out, it was very interesting. I even played that smart. Dr. Lucarini was very proud of me the way I did that. I kept in close contact with him. I didn't go into Manhattan. I was already out in Long Island, so I didn't go into Manhattan to get my stuff until the evening. And I waited until about 11 o'clock at night, and I go in there, get a parking space, because that's always the hardest part, is getting a parking space. And then I went into my apartment, stayed the night, and packed everything that was in there, because I hadn't been in my apartment in a long time. Packed everything that's in there, and then waited. Took a nap, went to sleep, watched some TV, relaxed for a little bit, and then when everything calmed down, and it was about 9 o'clock at night, I started packing everything in my van all night until it was about 4 o'clock in the morning when I got done. Went and turned my keys in, did all the stuff I had to do, and then left. Interesting thing, part of the day before, I spent sitting in my van just watching people, because I was parked in a nice little place where I could see a lot of stuff that was going on. I got to experience that at 7 o'clock at night. Every night, everybody hits pans and stuff and leans out the window and screams and hollers, and that was pretty cool. It was like being on the 50-yard line at the Super Bowl. But it was pretty amazing at that point in time how many people were out with their kids with no masks, and I mean, there's a lot of people that were wearing masks and stuff, but it was interesting to watch the differences between the people that were and weren't. And the crazy thing was, people driving, they were driving like idiots. I've never seen so many stupid people driving. Very few cars on the road, very few. And I literally sat there and watched 3 close calls of accidents, because it's like, I don't know. It's like people they figured there's nobody on the road, I'm not going to look before I turn. It was weird. So anyway, I sat there for a while and watched that, and eventually went back into my apartment. And then, as I was saying, about 4 o'clock in the morning, I was done. I got out of there. That was it. Done with Manhattan. Hadn't been back since. And then, who would have thought that the epicenter would then be Long Island in New York? And that's where I'm at. And so, interestingly enough, the way this unfolded was that there is a retirement home here in Long Island, and let me pull up the name of it. Our Lady of Consolation Nursing and Rehabilitation Care Center, and they had a patient that I'm closely related to, and they were coming home. And I had done everything I can to stay clear of the virus. But here's the interesting thing. There was this individual who was in their 70s, had a surgery in the middle of March, because they had severe neck issues and nerve issues. They had to have the surgery. Okay, they had the surgery. Everything worked out fine. Then had some complications a couple days afterwards. I learned a lot about how anesthesia affects people who are older and things of that nature. And so the doctors decided that this individual needed to go to a rehabilitation clinic, and this one was very close. So they went there. It was only supposed to be there for a week or 2 weeks until some of this anesthesia issues wore off. They were able to function a little bit better. That's what these rehabilitation clinics are supposed to be for. Now, when there's some part of the place is a nursing home, and that's for full-time patients, and then the other part is a rehabilitation clinic. And so elderly people who've had surgeries and they need this time to rehabilitate will go to these types of places. Now, many people think that these are different places, but they're actually not. They're the same place. A rehabilitation clinic and a nursing home are very similar. Many times, like this one, it's the same place, just people who are going to be there for the rest of their life. They're in a different area, different staff, same nightmares a lot of the times, which I'm going to tell you about. And in this case, what was supposed to be a week or 2 of rehabilitation, getting the patient where they were moving again because they were having complications, literally walking, and issues with kidneys and things like that. And so they were going to get these things back in order so they could come home. And before this patient, which was a male in his 70s, big guy, before he even left the hospital, what occurred was very interesting. and that the nurses were very upset and told this individual's dad that they needed to get him out of there because COVID was it had infested the hospital. So that was another thought in the process of this, was get him out of there, get him into the rehabilitation clinic, let them work with him, get him home as quickly as possible, because it wasn't in the nursing homes at this time, not here on Long Island, that we knew. Very interesting about the hospital, though. In retrospect, if it was that bad, there was a problem if it was already ravishing a hospital. I mean, as clean as I had been in trying to keep this thing at bay, and the other doctors that I know throughout the country that I talked about on this show and on this show, it was very interesting, the response that the nurses had. And many people on social media were saying, that's not true, you're faking it. Todd Starnes, who I thought, who I respect, Todd Starnes, but I thought was a terrible tweet. People taking videos like Todd and of hospitals where there were nobody in the parking lot. And so they're saying that there's no COVID people there because there's nobody in the parking lot. Well, on the inside of these hospitals was a totally different thing, because at that point in time, they stopped letting people in the hospitals. Same thing with the rehabilitation clinic and the nursing homes and so on and so forth. You weren't allowed to visit there, so there's not going to be any cars in the parking lot. See, that's part of this, which I'm going to get into later, is the stupidity of people and what they look at as evidence. And this is when you're an investigator and you're trained to be an investigator, you don't look at evidence and necessarily take it at face value and say, this is absolute truth. You have to investigate the evidence just like you investigate the case. That's part of investigating. I'll get more to that later. So, as it turns out, this individual goes to the rehabilitation clinic. Should have been perfect. Should have been fine. But these rehabilitation clinics, as I find out, are nightmares. Now, I put this out on social media as well, and of course, you're going to get pushback from certain people who've worked in a good rehabilitation clinic or a nursing home. And it's hilarious in the way that I use that word loosely, in the way that they respond. And they say, you're wrong. Well, and they say, you shouldn't use general terms and you're wrong. Well, they are actually doing the same thing. And it's better to always err on the side of caution than to say nursing homes are not like this, they're good places, yada, yada, because it's not true. It's just not true. The amount of people that have reached out to me after I talked to them, after I put this on social media, telling the nightmare stories of these people that work in these rehabilitation clinics. They're, by and large, a lot of these places hire people with the qualifications of somebody who cooks a burger at McDonald's. And that is no exaggeration. And they bring them in there and they train them loosely. And then they have a nurse or a doctor that is on shift that, God bless them, hopefully they're good, but they're not going to be able, they're not going to be able to watch over everything that's happening. Horror stories that I've heard, not in my case, not in this case here, but people have reached out to me and said that there were instances and they had a lawsuit because the staff was coming in the evenings, like in the middle of the night, and turning the TV on full blast and then leaving the room, or beating up their elderly parents who later died. And these people felt horrible because they'd put their parents in there. This isn't a one-off story. These stories, you can't even imagine the amount of responses that I got from this. Interestingly enough, I heard, I didn't actually see it, but I heard that Cuomo had passed a law saying that during a pandemic, you couldn't sue these rehabilitation clinics and nursing homes. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but stupid if it is, because what does it matter if it's a pandemic? If they're doing criminal behavior, then you should be able to sue them. Even attorneys have said it's hard to get a lawsuit against them because of the way the laws are written. And this is absolutely horrendous. Reagan wrote a Bill of Rights, or had a Bill of Rights way back when, but even that fell short. And nobody's really looked into this. one of the people that I know that is a nurse wrote me and said that, the way these things work is that just like if you're in the military and you get that a general's coming to do an inspection, or a congressman or senator is going to visit where you're stationed, and all of a sudden everything ramps up and it's pretty and perfect. And then when they leave, it goes right back down to crap. Well, that's the way it is in these homes. They're always tipped off that there's going to be an inspection. And so they clean up their act while the inspectors are there, and then they get a good inspection. It's broken. It's a broken system. And I could go on and on, but this is going to be a perfect example of how broken the system is, because it directly reflected on me. So this individual was there, what should have been a very simple rehabilitation of getting them back up and walking, flushing their kidneys, helping them move their hands, doing these things to get their body working again after this neck surgery. Well, they because COVID had gotten somehow into this closed facility. Now, the only way it could have gotten in there is if they brought an elderly patient into the hospital who had it, which is possible. Or more likely, which has been shown across the nation, that these workers who are, again, I'm not going to say every single worker that works in a nursing home and a rehabilitation clinic is a lowlife, but these individuals that are staff in many of these places, again, have the training and education of somebody who flips burgers at McDonald's. So they come in and then go out. There's no, like they say, okay, well, we're tested to see if we have a fever before we come in. Well, you don't have to have a fever to be contagious, right? Some people have fever. Some people don't. Some people are carriers. Some people aren't. And so that was their main thing, was that if you didn't have a fever, you come to work. And some people even, and I can guarantee you, there was not massive testing on this. I can guarantee it. Because just like all the other balls that they dropped, I'm sure that they weren't testing every single time with fever. How do you feel? I feel good. Okay, come on to work. So these people come to work, then they go home, they interact, and then they come back. And if they get it, they're going to give it. So that's basically what happened. It started getting all in this rehabilitation clinic. And then they decided after 2 weeks, and the family found out that this individual was being left in a chair for 2 weeks, 24 hours a day, not put back in the bed, not cleaned, teeth weren't being brushed, nothing. And it compounded itself as the individual sat in the chair. It got worse and worse. You go try sitting in a chair for 2 weeks. It's dangerous, actually, because you could get blood clots and have a heart attack. Their feet were swollen beyond belief, hands so swollen they couldn't manipulate their fingers because the staff would not take care of them. There was no rehabilitation that happened at all. Basically, the person just sat there for 2 weeks. And the doctors, according to the patient, the doctor wouldn't even enter the room, would just stand at the door and ask them questions and move on. Now, that's criminal as far as I'm concerned. And it's abuse of a person who couldn't, and they take the patient on and then they leave them in a chair for 2 weeks. Now, Our Lady of Consolation Nursing and Rehabilitative Care Center in Long Island. It's a Catholic health service. Obviously, they don't follow the teachings of the Catholic faith and the teachings of Christ in caring about people, obviously. Their slogan is, at the heart of health. I don't think so. When the family found out about this and said, we've got to get him out of there, which any normal person would, they asked, has he been exposed to COVID? No, the nurses said no, absolutely not. And then they released him with no mask, not even being cleaned, wearing the same slipper socks that they give, and probably hadn't changed those in weeks. Released him to his family. Family brings him home, and as he gets out of the vehicle, takes couple steps and collapses. And that's where I come in. I rush down to help, and we had to lay him on the ground because he just wasn't able to walk. You can't walk after sitting in a chair for 2 weeks after a certain neck surgery. Still has the stitches in the neck. No rehabilitation has happened whatsoever. I've had neck surgery. You have to be moving around several days after your surgery. You have to move around. Otherwise, you're so stiff and your nerves just don't rehabilitate if you don't move around. He collapsed. And so we had to get him in the house. And in the process of getting him in the house and getting him set down, we all got infected. Because it's when you react to these things, it's very quick. Didn't have time to really properly cover up because of the instance and the nature of the situation that happened very quickly. And we all got infected. Now, we didn't know at this point. We didn't know that this individual had the virus because it was told to them by the nurses at this rehabilitation clinic, and I use that term lightly, that there was no COVID. As it turns out, it's ravished that nursing home. And they knowingly released this individual into the public and infected a minimum of 4 people that we know of, one who ended up having double pneumonia, the rest of us who ended up having the weirdest illness you will ever. It's anybody who's had this and had the symptoms will tell you that it's not like the flu, which all these doctors and everybody keep telling you on television. It's not like the flu. And I'll go into that in a minute. So it took several days. We had one test, and and the other thing is they didn't really know what they were doing when it came to giving the test at first, I don't believe, because the first test I got was they just kind of swabbed the inside of my nose. We knew something was up because we were all starting to get a fever. We didn't feel good. The test came back negative. So we went back 3 days later, and this time they weren't playing around. They shoved that thing all the way up to the back of your throat, almost through your nose. And I got tested for the flu as well. The flu was negative. The test for COVID came back positive. Now, I only had contact with this individual twice within a 30-minute period, and both times I went and took a shower afterwards, washed my face, hands as good as I could, took all the clothes, put them immediately in the washer, and I still got it. I still got it because I breathed it in, most likely. So now I'm positive. I tested positive. And here's where this is where the podcast stopped. And my life quickly came to a screeching halt. And anybody who's had this, and they're really on the grand scale of things, it's I can't say that it is a grand number of people that have had this, a huge number in the nation, but mostly probably because of what this country did, which was locked down, like all the other countries in the world. So what did I feel throughout this, myself and the others that were infected? Well, hot flashes are the weirdest thing. I mean, you'll be sitting here and your temperature will be 98. And all of a sudden, you feel like you're on fire. Now, I had the flu, like everybody else is saying. I think I had this. I think I had this back in January. Some people are saying, I think I had this back in November or December. Well, you didn't have it in November or December because by and large, it wasn't here in the country. And when I asked them, well, what were your symptoms? And they described their symptoms. It's not like this. I had the flu. I had fever. I sweated like crazy. No energy. Just felt absolutely horrendous. Cough like nobody's business. It got in my lung. It sounded like demon children every time I went to bed at night and slept. I would breathe out and in, and my lungs would be going, for 30 seconds after every breath. So that was the flu, and it progressed. It came on over several days, and then it lasted for a couple of weeks, and then slowly branched off. And to be honest with you, it was much more intense over those 2 weeks. The intensity of the flu was much greater. The symptoms were always there when I had the flu. With this, it was totally different. And everybody that I know that's had it said the same thing. You feel like you have zero energy. Now imagine having the flu, or those of you that had the flu, imagine if you had that feeling of no energy, like literally where you just feel like I can't keep my eyes open, but you didn't have the other symptoms. Because with this, the symptoms, some of them came on together, but many of them didn't. It was like they were standing in line waiting to punch you. So you would have a slight fever, no energy to the point where you just could not stay awake. Then you get up, you do what you got to do, you sit back down, you're watching TV, you're doing whatever, and then all of a sudden it felt like you knew you were getting a fever. You take your temperature, it was 99, 100, but on the inside of your body, it felt like somebody was microwaving you. You didn't get the chills. At least the people that I know, none of us really got the chills. Maybe once or twice we had some chills, but overall, it was a burning sensation on the inside of your body. I've never had a fever like this. Never had a fever like this. I've talked to several women who had been through menopause, and they said this was pretty close to the hot flashes that they would get. But it was so intense that it literally felt like you were being cooked on the inside. And then it would go away. And then you're left with, but it would come back and go away. It's not like it would just went away. I mean, this was over 2-3 week period, several times a day. The first couple of nights when I had the virus, my sweating was horrendous at night. I would go to bed, I would lay down and just start sweating like crazy. But I didn't have the chills. I literally didn't want any covers on me. I was really roasting, which is not like the flu. Then the other thing were the pains. I've had the flu pains before, but this was very interesting because almost everywhere, and I worked out up until I got the point where I got sick. So where I've been injured before, and I've been injured a lot and all the things that I've done, all those injuries were unbelievably sore. And my legs felt like I hadn't felt the feelings in my legs since I was a teenager, and my legs were growing, and I got those pains where my legs, I just couldn't sit down. It hurt so bad that my legs felt like I was the American Werewolf in London. I don't know if you ever saw that movie, and he's turning into the werewolf and his fingers and hands and everything are extending. That's what my legs felt like. Just this overwhelming feeling of like my legs were going to explode. That I've never had in the flu. Never had that. Now, this is pretty similar, but different. The cough that I developed was the scariest cough I've ever had. Now, what I haven't finished telling you about the individual that I got that I came in contact with, who we helped in the house, 3 days later, just started to really go downhill. And so he was admitted to the hospital, and within less than 24 hours was on a ventilator. And unfortunately, about a week and a half later, he passed. Now, knowing that, and having this thing growing inside of you is very scary. At the same time, I'm talking to multiple doctors who are on the front line, and they're telling me that the age had shifted a little bit, that they were still dealing with elderly people dying, but now they were starting to have middle age men, 48 to 55, fathers, and they would come in and develop this cough, feel pretty bad, come in, and within a day they're on a ventilator, and within 3 days they're dead. So every time this cough would start, and it would, again, like the rest of the symptoms, it would come and go. It was extremely terrifying because you don't know what's going to happen. Is this going to develop into something that is going to kill me? You don't know. What you do know is that there's nothing you can do. Yes, I went on the hydroxychloroquine, I think that's what it's called, and a Z-Pack. I didn't do them together. I did the Z-Pack first, and the hydroxychloroquine, and that may have helped. I'm in halfway decent shape, not in the shape I was when I was a SEAL, but I'm in halfway decent shape. And the thing that they're finding about this virus is that, like many viruses in the past, what kills you is not necessarily the virus, it's your body's response. If you have a very strong immune system, your immune system ends up overdoing it, and that's what ends up killing you. And the hydroxychloroquine actually keeps your immune system from going into overdrive. At least that's what some of the studies have said. So all of us took it except for one person that was infected. The one individual did end up getting double pneumonia, but came through it and is now improved. So, and one of us out of the four is still showing symptoms. In fact, their symptoms are a little bit more today than they were last week. And this is now pretty much a month, 4 weeks into it. So here we are, I'm sitting here and this cough comes and you don't know what's going to occur. And this is psychological because the cough wasn't any worse than it was when I had the flu, but you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what this is going to develop into. And that's a frightening thing. So psychologically, because you're not sure where it's going, and because you know that there's no drugs that they have for this that can knock it out, you just don't know what's going to happen. And again, different from the flu, the symptoms would come and go. Sometimes you felt like, man, you know what? I really think I should just get up and just go about my day regularly. I really don't feel that bad. And then it would hit you again. You'd be on fire. You wouldn't have any energy. And then at night, the cough would start coming. The scariest night for me was, I don't know, maybe after about 7 days, I started developing that wheezing sound in my chest. And that I would lay on my side, and it was hard for me to go to sleep because it sounded again, hear the demon children in my lung again screaming. And that was a scary thing. Now, many of you out there are saying, oh, this just sounds, doesn't sound that bad. It sounds like it's more psychological. It was psychological. But also, the person that I got it from died. And there's other people down the street from me in their 40s died from this. And I know other people are going to say, well, this guy was elderly. The other guy wasn't. He was 48 years old. And people are going to say, well, they had preconditions. Well, you don't know when it comes to this virus because relatively a lot of the stuff is unknown, who it's going to hit. And when you look at other pandemics, it's very similar. The elderly are weaker. A lot of them have preconditions. They're going to get hit. But other people get hit as well. Young, very young, middle age. You just don't know how it's going to develop with inside the body of each individual. You just don't know. So you can't, it's like gambling. You can't discount the lottery and say, I'm not going to play that. Nobody ever wins. Well, somebody always wins eventually. And it's the same thing with these viruses. People say, I'm not going to worry about it. It's no big deal. I'm going to go protest with no mask, or I'm going to do this or that. I'm not going to fly without a mask or whatever. I think this is ridiculous what we're doing. Well, somebody's going to get it eventually. Could be you. and you could die. And really, when you sit here and you watch the nonsense on the news and on social media, people who don't have the virus, people who haven't been around somebody in close proximity who passed away from it, and you see all this nonsense, you sit back and you have a completely different look at this. And then, I don't know about other people, but I went and started researching, the Spanish flu, for instance, in 1918, and the way that the world reacted to that. Similar in a lot of ways, different in a lot of ways. Very eye-opening, though. But I will tell you, as it developed, and I got used to the different symptoms, because it lasted about 3 weeks for me. I started to, the psychological aspect of it started to die down, and quickly it took about 2 days where I was like, okay, listen, if I go, but I'm not going to freak out about this. I'm going to deal with it. And then I was able to kind of just, when the symptoms came on, I would let them just work their way through my body and do what I had to do. And it became mentally a bit easier. And that's where the stuff that I was seeing online, I stayed off of social media. I didn't do this podcast. I stayed clear of it, and pretty much just sat and contemplated a lot of things and sat here. And then when I went back on social media and went back on and started watching the news again and stuff, it was pretty ridiculous, the things that I'm seeing. I mean, I still kept up. I just didn't interact. And it's pretty ridiculous the way things have unfolded. I've never seen more, and this is probably one of the things that was very psychologically hard for me, was to sit back and watch not just the left and criminals take advantage of this, which leftist politicians have definitely taken advantage of it. Criminals have definitely taken advantage. And when I say criminals, I'm not talking about, I'm sure there are petty thieves and things that have taken advantage of it. I got a notification from somebody saying that theft is up on subways in New York City. I don't know if theft is up or if the arrests are up, because there's not a lot of people to blend into once you rob somebody. In New York City, there's so many people out there. You can steal something and then split and blend into the millions of people that are on the sidewalks. It's not really the case right now. So I think probably a little bit easier to find people and arrest them once they've done a robbery. So, but the criminals that I'm talking about are the ones that own Shake Shack, for instance. Shake Shack is, those of you who don't know, it's a burger joint. I don't know if it's all over the country. It's definitely on the East Coast, and it's very successful, very successful. They took, when they had this small business loan program come out, which was part of the couple $1 trillion, they say between 2 and 6 trillion. I don't know how they can say between 2 and 6 trillion. It's either 2 or 6 trillion. There's no in between. It's not like that's I don't know, $5 or $20. We're talking about trillions of dollars here. So it was part of the program. They were going to give out loans to small businesses that had 2 or more employees. And as it turns out, companies like Shake Shack, which is very successful, Harvard University. There's another island right in Miami that's the richest place you can live in the United States. They have, I don't know, less than 250 employees, but they took the $2 million. Those are criminals. And those people really did work this system. And they had politicians that worked with them and helped them do things, because that's the people who donate to their campaigns. Those are the criminals that I'm talking about. But the other thing that really, really was getting to me were these protests that were springing up, and how all these people were saying that their constitutional rights were being violated. And there are instances where I do believe absolutely that their constitutional rights are being violated. I think small businesses have just been, they've just been crushed. Small restaurants, just all kinds of small businesses have been crushed. And I think that should have been, the problem is you can't think through these problems when the problems are happening. And this is a problem in politics in Washington, D.C. and state agencies where they don't pre-think these things out. And I'll give some examples of that in a minute. But I was shocked by the responses that were coming from the right, from the conservatives, the constitutionalists in this country. Now, there's one thing to protest violations of your constitutional rights. Anybody who knows me and who has listened to me and followed me over the past, since I got out of the FBI in 2013 and got into media and I guess you could call it activism, you know that I'm a constitutionalist through and through. I believe that the civilians in this country have every right to stand up and go to war against the governments in states and the federal government. I mean, I literally believe that we have far surpassed the time for armed conflict in this country to take our constitutional rights back, because there's criminals that are running this country, and they own Nancy Pelosi. There's plenty on the right and the left, all right, that mimic Nancy Pelosi and her criminal ways. There's plenty on both sides. That's because both political parties are corrupt. They're both private companies and they're both corrupt. Just like Shake Shack taking the money. That's the two political parties. Okay. And I've said for a long time, I had to temper what I said for a long time, because I was told by several of the radio shows that I host for, you can't say stuff like, they just wouldn't have me on anymore. I won't be on Hannity anymore. You're not going to hear my voice on Sean Hannity's radio show anymore, which I'm fine with. And I can go into that more later on, but you're not going to hear me on that show anymore. So hosting on that or being on that show. But that's because they won't go beyond what is going to maybe inflame their sponsors a little bit, because they're afraid of not making money. Listen, people, you got to realize it doesn't matter if it's Fox News or CNN or Hannity's radio show or any of these different entertainment shows and the networks that broadcast them. It's entertainment. Okay. I do believe that that MSNBC and CNN and many of these leftists that are on the different networks and stations, they truly are ideological, and that's what drives them. And their sponsors are ideological right with them. They're leftist, and they pretty much own the airways. So they're going to say what they want to say and get away with it. When you're on the right, you can't quite do that. You will lose sponsors. But I don't think on the right that their ideology pushes them as much as their lust for money. And I think a lot of these podcasters, Ben Shapiro, for instance, I don't know Ben Shapiro, don't like to listen to Ben Shapiro. His voice makes me want to have a seizure. And every time I turn on Fox or put on Fox.com, Ben Shapiro is telling everybody that they should do this, or psychologically this is going to have this toll. And he has no qualifications in any of this stuff. He's got an opinion. Yeah, he went to Harvard. I don't have a high opinion about Harvard or any of the other Ivy League schools. I really don't. I think the Ivy League schools have probably injured this country more than any other institute in the nation. They've produced more people who are ego-driven individuals and ideologically driven individuals who have written bad policy based on their egos and their ideologies than any other single entities in the nation, and really in the world. These Ivy League schools produce ideological, ego-driven individuals. And not all of them, just like I was talking about earlier with the rehabilitation clinics. There's great minds that come out of these places. But just because somebody graduates from MIT, for instance, doesn't mean that they know everything that there is to know about everything. Same thing with Harvard. But when it comes to podcasts and radio shows, people on the right will compromise their ideological beliefs so that they can get sponsorship or so that they won't lose sponsorship because they want to make a lot of money. That's what it boils down to for them. And a lot of times they literally believe they know everything about everything. So I was shocked watching these protests and the people that come out there. Many of them I know and have goodness in their heart. But the fact is, for a long time, the same people that came out to protest because they were being made to stay home are the same people that didn't protest when governor said that we should just take a baby when it's born and set it to the side, and then if it dies, it dies. Or if the parent says that they don't want it, then we'll abort it. We'll give it comfort and care and make sure it's not in pain and then abort it. Kill it is what they're saying. Kill a live baby. There are babies in many of the countries where they allow late term abortions, and these doctors do these unethical doctors, and the leftist criminal people that make the laws allow these late term abortions where babies are just, you could take them out, cut the woman open, take the baby out, and the baby will live, and they will kill it. I didn't see any of you getting up for that. I didn't. The Second Amendment has been attacked for years and years and years. I don't see you all getting up for that. Virginia, you all set the example back several months ago. You got up, you stood against the government of Virginia and your criminal governor, and you made a difference for the right reasons at the right time. But you didn't just wait until it was an inconvenience. You got up before it was an inconvenience and you did something about it. Now, majority of people that went and protested these things, I can guarantee you didn't go and do research on prior pandemics, such as the Spanish flu in 1918. You go and watch one documentary on that, and what you're going to see is the same thing that happened now. But you didn't see people protesting because they stayed home. They had no choice. You see, the difference then versus now, they had no clue what they were dealing with. No clue. So I saw one story where there were so many people dying that they would either set the bodies outside or literally put them in a ditch, and then they would come by and get them. Now, the number of people dying versus number of people who got it wasn't that much different than this, but just everybody got it. It was widespread because they didn't know about, as quickly as we did, about quarantining themselves. In 1918, most people eventually did quarantine themselves, but the masks, and they also wore masks, but the masks they were wearing, they weren't N95 masks. They're very porous, and they allowed the virus to get through that. But by and large, when you watch it, these people were quarantining themselves, and there were cases where governors and mayors shut down cities in an attempt to stop it. You didn't hear people protesting. They stayed home because people were dying. And unfortunately, in one town, for instance, the mayor of the town shut the town down. They didn't allow anyone into the town, period. It was told, there were signs, do not stop in this town. Just keep going. And you didn't see protests. You saw people banding together for the right reason, in agreement that we got to do this to try to get this thing to go away, to give it time to go away. Unfortunately, the mailman is the one who brought it in and spread it through that town. It got there anyway. But it's a different day and age now. And we have doctors that are able to identify this stuff, and they're working to either come up with a vaccine or using, or the herd. What do they call that? Where enough people get it so that herd immunity, I think is what it's called, or using our those of us that have had it, our blood plasma to give that out. I mean, they're working for different things. They couldn't even identify that stuff back in 1918. They couldn't identify it. They didn't know how to look at it. They were looking for things other than viruses because they couldn't see it. They didn't have the technology to see it. And what did the people do? What did the governments do? They did the same thing they're doing now. They quarantined people, cities shut down, and eventually what happened was the virus died out. We don't know how that stuff works, actually. I mean, there's theory on why viruses come and then they go, but eventually that virus went away. And it took a long time for life to go back to normal. Now, this isn't the only time, but I think the Spanish flu is the best on record where we can see what happens when you just don't know what's out there. And this thing happens and how to deal with it. Now, interesting thing about the Spanish flu was that they believe in the late 1800s that a variant or the same thing came through and ravished, just killed many, many old people. But interestingly enough, in 1918, it wasn't the elderly that were dying. It was younger and middle-aged people and many children. And they believe that there's a possibility that the reason it didn't affect the elderly so bad was because they were actually alive during the late 1800s pandemic that went through. They weren't very specific on this. They said that they believed that it happened, so it might not have been recorded as well, and that those people had come in contact with that and built enough immunity that they didn't die later on in 1918, which is also a wake-up call because we're doing all this incredible quarantining, and there's a possibility if it comes back that all these people, they're not going to want to quarantine again. And if there is no cure for this, then we may have more and more people dying from this. The thing that was interesting about the 1918 flu, or Spanish flu, they called it, is that people were dying very rapidly. I mean, it wasn't just a week or 2 weeks and they would decline to go on a ventilator. I mean, these people would die within a day. They would go to work, go home, wake up the next day, didn't feel good, and they were dead by 3. So here's the thing that bothered me the most about these patriotic, conservative, constitutionalist protests, okay? I love the fact that finally people on the right are protesting. I love that. I think it's been too little too late, really. Now you're going to go out there and protest because you're being made to stay home. I mean, in some cases, the thing about where they're banning gun sales, I think is absolutely ridiculous. Okay, that is definitely a constitutional violation. They're trying to, in several states, are doing these things. That is definitely needs immediate action. There's other things like Whitmer in Michigan and the things that she's coming up with. Absolutely violations of people's constitution. You can get on the freeway and drive, but you can't go to your second home that you own and pay taxes for. Makes no sense at all. I understand closing the beaches in North Carolina or the other places, but if somebody owns a house on the beach, they should be able to go there. Same thing with, I know people in Jersey who have homes on the beach. That's where they went. They should be able to walk out to the beach and walk their dog. They can check on them and say, yeah, I live right there. They're not going to overpopulate the beach, but see, that's bad leadership. Bad leadership is why they stop those types of things. So I absolutely love the fact that the right is finally protesting. What I do not like is, one, that you don't take this seriously and you think once it starts to spread through the minds of many people on the right, you could tell the biggest fabricated lie and you people will just take it at face value. Oh, well, a doctor said that. Did you check the doctor out? Is he even an MD? No. Have you looked at his background and seen if the guy is a quack? No. And then when you show them that, they say, well, everything he said is true. So whatever. Well, how do you know it's true? You don't. You do know that a virus is ravaging this country and the world. Okay. You do know that. You do know that there's been 40-something thousand people just in the United States dying, right? You're not going to, again, are there people that on the left that are lying, or different people that are using this to their advantage and they'll skew numbers? Absolutely believe that there is. But if you think that there's not something in this world right now that is really, really taking a toll and has the ability to kill you quickly, you are an idiot, okay? You're an idiot. And if you think that quarantining hasn't made a difference on the level that we've done it, you're an idiot. Period. So when you all go out and you do these protests, the stuff that you're saying and the reason that you're protesting, it is, for me, very disheartening, because there are all these other things and all these other times when you could have been protesting and for the right reason long before this and standing together, and you would have made a difference. But you won't, because it doesn't affect you. Abortion, killing babies is legal. And you say, well, I'm not going to have a baby. I'm already married. We already have, 3 or 4 children. Not me, but I'm saying you. So it doesn't really affect you. We're Christians. We wouldn't have abortions. Well, do you think you should not stand up for the other children that are being killed against the evilness? Well, in my state, we can carry guns. I ain't got to worry about it. Well, do you not realize that if one state and then another state and then another city violate the Second Amendment and they get away with it, that is eventually going to impact the Second Amendment? But it doesn't affect you, so you don't get up and go do anything. Well, I don't own a gun, so you're not going to go protest. Don't you realize that the Second Amendment is the bodyguard of the First Amendment and every other right that you have out there? And you think that it doesn't really affect you on a daily basis. You can still work, and all these conservatives, well, I work for a living, that's why I don't protest. Well, you know what? You can't complain when you're told to stay home. If you're not willing to stand up for the Constitution on a regular basis, on a regular day, then your voice is mute when you go out there and stand up against the fact that your daily life has been inconvenienced. And then you show up to these things with your children with no protection. Or you're elderly and you go out there and you protest with no protection over your face. It's stupid. It's mind-boggling to me how people can have such a clear understanding of why this country was created the way it has been by the founding fathers, why the Bill of Rights was included, why things like freedom of religion, the separation of church and state, and where that term came from. Yet, while this is happening, groups are maneuvering to eliminate, they have protested. There's this one fake group that talks about religious liberties and military. It's all fake. The whole thing's fake. It's ran by a guy who's hates Christians, and his last name's Weinstein, which I find interesting, but he hates Christians, and he has successfully gotten the base where the 10th Mountain Division is, I forgot where that's, up in upstate New York, to take down the chaplains on their Facebook page, the chaplains' videos when people need that stuff the most. That's how you tell people are criminal or leftists, is they go, even during a time of crisis, they still go after this. You look and you see in politics, the people who go after this stuff during a time of crisis, those are the bad people. But I find it mind-boggling that all those people out there protesting on a regular day would not, I could put out 1,000 tweets and Facebook posts and they would not show up. That's why Virginia a couple months ago was such an anomaly. Those people showed up for the right reason at the right time and they succeeded. 20,000 strong. During a workday. They didn't lose their jobs. It was a little inconvenient, but you could talk to all the people that went to there. They said it was amazing to stand together. But that's not what's happening. You think, okay, we're standing together in Michigan or in North Carolina or all these different places where they're doing these protests, right? Right now, nobody's there. For one, you're talking to the wind. Two, you're going to be made to look crazy because you're showing up during a pandemic with no covering, saying all this stuff. You know, maybe you're right. Maybe you're right for many reasons to go out there and protest. But you're showing up and these weirdos show up with, I've got this and Dr. Fauci said that and this and that, and they put this stuff up there and you look crazy. So you lose your credibility. You see, in order to battle an enemy, you have to be smart. Especially, look, if I'm going with a group of SEALs and we're going to take down a target, right? We're not just going to wing it. We're going to use all of our training. First of all, we're trained for years. Then we're going to look at this enemy and determine their vulnerabilities, where they're weakest. What is our intended tactical and strategic mission? And we're going to think our way through this, plan it, rehearse it, and then go and do it. You all just show up on a day when you can because you have no work, because you've been inconvenienced. You come up, you don't think your way through it. You don't think about the image that you have. You don't think about how that can be used against you. You just feel like, we got to go protest. There's more to it than that. When it comes to war, which this is, you don't just wing it. And that's the problem with you people, is that you're not thinking your way through this stuff. You think this is a pandemic or it's not a pandemic, that it's fake, that Dr. Fauci is a Clintonite and all this stuff. And you build this stuff, this house of cards in your brain, and you don't realize, that you have built your opinion based on stuff that your hatred of the left, not whether or not a pandemic is real. And so you're going to allow things to come into your brain that agree with your opinion. That is no different than the left. That is no different than what liberals that I know in New York City that I'm friends with, and I try to have debates with them or talk. They can't even talk because as soon as you disagree with them, they think you're crazy. Why? Because they've built their facts with their opinions. And that's what you all have done. There is a time, there's a place, and there's a methodology for protesting. It is a battle, whether you realize it or not. And you all mucked it up. Everything you did is not going to make a difference. Very little difference, if it makes any at all. Because you waited until they could make you look crazy. You waited until a time when the best thing you could do is stay home for a period of time. You waited. Even then, you should have immediately, when they said you got to be quarantining, if you all were organized, you would immediately said, what does that mean? What does it mean we're shutting stuff down? You didn't question it then. You allowed it to happen. Why? Because you aren't together. You aren't cohesive. If you were, you would have been thinking this stuff through years ago and working together years ago. But you don't. The government does not forward think things. And guess who else doesn't? You, the conservatives in this country. You don't forward think things. And so what happens? You end up going out Oh, because we're not working, we can protest now. Tell that to the people in Virginia. They did it on their work days, and they were successful, and they looked strong. You don't hear anybody, even on the left, talking about those weirdos that were in Virginia, because what they did was the right thing at the right time, and the picture that they pushed out, the image that the world saw, was strength, not desperation, not stupidity, not these. Listen, you have got to stop listening to the quote unquote experts on social media that tell you what your opinion wants to hear. I'm not a Fauci supporter. I'm not a Shiva, Dr. Shiva supporter. I'm not this other crazy doctor who's been going around and was given time on Laura Ingram's show. I don't support that guy. What I support is the truth. And having seen it firsthand, what's going on with this virus, it is not to be played with. But this country wasn't prepared for it. I don't care about the other countries. I'm not saying I don't care about people, but I don't live in other countries. I can't say what they should have and shouldn't have done. First of all, why have we been trusting China to begin with? We shouldn't be trusting China. We shouldn't have been allowing them to produce everything. You know who really is to blame for all that? Greedy people. And you can't say it's just big business. I know a lot of people who manufacture a lot of different things, small things, things that you wear, or things that you eat, and it's manufactured in China because it's cheaper. Well, I don't know how rich you got to be, but look, you can't blame the leftists for that alone. Look, here's the bottom line, folks, with all this. You want to make this country stronger. You want your constitutional rights to be as rigid as they were intended to be. Don't wait until there's a pandemic and you're inconvenienced because you got to stay home to go out and protest. You need to be doing that on a regular basis. When this is over with, when we get through this, and there will be a time when this virus, if it follows every other virus, it will mysteriously eventually just kind of die out. Or they'll find a vaccine for it, which I have no interest in Bill Gates. That guy is a fruitcake. And I've told the story many, many times. When I was in the FBI and I was at the UN, I was the rep there in their operations center from the FBI, and I went and watched this thing on world hunger that they were having, and Bill Gates and Harmy Karzai from Afghanistan and all these very wealthy people were sitting in there, and Bill Gates was up there, and they were talking about world hunger and starvation in the world. Not once did I hear them come up with a solution like, where are agriculture people in here? How do we turn this dirt into crops? And how do we find out ways to irrigate this and get water in there? And I didn't hear any of that. It was all about raising money. The whole thing was about raising money. Bill Gates is a computer geek who made a lot of money and now has a God mentality, thinking he can go around and change the world with his ideas. And that is, if Bill Gates wants to be to go and push vaccinations, he needs to go back and go to medical school and become a researcher for about 10 years. And then maybe I'll listen to what he has to say. But he's burnt a lot of bridges and caused a lot of people to die because of his God complex. So I don't really care about what he has to say. But I also really don't care about people who are out there saying that all vaccines are bad, because they're not. A lot of people in this world would be dead if it wasn't for certain vaccines. Now, do I believe that all vaccines should be given to children all at once? No, I don't believe in that. I think that there's definitely something going on with the way the vaccines are given. But do I believe a lot of these vaccines are needed? Yes. And look, I'm not against having studies done by private organizations that are not politically connected. Love to see, or connected to companies. Love to see studies on vaccines by those people, and get real neutral. I don't want to say opinions, but neutral studies done by groups like that. Look, the truth is what the truth is. If it came back and said these vaccines are dangerous and they're killing people and causing autism, then we need to look at that. But I don't think that because you think vaccines are bad, that you seek out somebody who says vaccines are bad, that it makes vaccines bad. And if somebody comes up for a vaccine for this, then I say we use it if it works. But when we get through this, whether it's through a vaccine or it goes away or herd immunity, whatever, the people of this country better smarten up. Now, and that's a blanket statement. Left, right. Why you people still fall to the left or right is beyond me. You have a constitution. You're free. Live the way you want. If your group of people says you should live this way, live that way. You people, you don't want to have guns, don't have guns. People over here believe in the Second Amendment. They want to have guns, they should have guns. If it doesn't violate the Constitution, or they don't go above and beyond what the Constitution says, then why does anyone care? Why does everybody feel like they should live like I think? That's not what this country is about. It's, I want to live this way. You should be able to live that way. So when this is all over and done with, and I'm going to speak to the people on the right because I really don't think I can speak to the people on the left. The people in this country need to realize that you were given a gift over 200 years ago by people who, through their sweat and blood and life and death, figured out what we needed in order to be free. And the number one thing they saw, despite or separate from the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and that declaration that gave us independence from Europe, the one thing they saw is that instead of forcing people to pick up arms or forcing people to bow to a king or forcing people to worship whatever religion they choose, what they realized is that giving the people the freedom to be their best, the freedom to say, I believe in this or I believe in that, the freedom to say, I want to protect myself. I don't want to wait on the king or the queen or whatever to come to my protection. I want to protect myself. To give you the freedom to say, I believe that if I worship this way, that I'm going to go to heaven, then you can do that. They realized that giving the power of choice and the power of voice and the power of defense and just power to the citizenry is where the strength of the country lies. Everything else is built upon that. If the citizenry stands together and is steadfast in defending that which gives them the freedom that they have, nothing, no government, no king, no dictator, no outside force can ever come in and injure what they have been given. But it took less than 250 years for that to so diminish that when people have any type of pressure or any type of disarray or people are oppressing their rights, as long as it doesn't interfere with their daily activity, they just don't get up and they don't care and they don't do anything about it except go on social media. It's the worst part about social media. People really think they're doing something when they bitch and complain on social media. You're not doing anything. You're not doing anything. It's just like a homeless guy sitting on the side of the road blathering. People walk right by and they don't listen. And it's time for the American people to realize that the reason we're in this environment right now, the reason why we're quarantined, the reason why there was no plan, the reason why the intubators weren't there and the hospitals were filled up, and the reason why you're having to worry about whether or not you can buy a gun in a state during a pandemic, or you can go to your guest house or your second house or whatever, is because you gave over your freedoms to criminals and ideologues. And it is exactly the opposite of what the founding fathers intended. They intended you to be strong and for you to be in charge. They didn't intend for politics to be a career. They wanted those people in and out, and you haven't done anything about it. You want term limits? Then do what they did in Virginia. Don't wait until a pandemic. Go to D.C., 1 million strong, 10 million strong. Do a thing state by state where you stand, and don't let the senators and congressmen out of their house. 1 million people standing around Nancy Pelosi's house while she's in there. She's not going anywhere. The police force there is not going to stop that. You think that the police force in Virginia could have done anything if they said, when there was over 20,000 people armed surrounding the Capitol building, if they said, nope, this governor's not coming back to work? What do you think the police would have done? Call in the National Guard, shoot 20,000 people? No. I would love to have seen what would have happened. I can guarantee you that governor would have never gone back to work. And there probably would have been tens of thousands of people flocking there to join in that. You don't wait until a pandemic when you need to be inside to go and protest against something that you allowed to happen. That governor in Michigan's been there for a lot longer than just 3 weeks. And I didn't see anybody in Michigan protesting her then. They didn't like her. Same thing with the rest of these states. Now that goes, all this goes far beyond me being sick. But I'll tell you, I've had plenty of time to sit back and watch. And it's been appalling. People saying, giving their testimony on social media, how they were sick or their loved ones have died, and other people coming at them saying, well, you're just emotional. You don't really know. And the person saying that hasn't had anybody die. They haven't been sick. Oh, well, I had this back in January or December. No, you didn't. You didn't have this. Well, this doctor said this or that. He's not even a medical doctor. Oh, well, this guy is. Yeah, and he's been brought up on charges for quackery. It's been sick sitting back and watching the conservatives in this country say the stupid stuff that they've been saying. Instead of saying, okay, we messed up. We haven't been standing against the tyrannical movements in this country in the government. Right now, we need to stand together and make sure that the elderly are quarantined, that they get their food. I don't hear all these people on social media that are out there protesting. I don't see you volunteering to feed the elderly or people that are sick. I didn't have any constitutionalists calling me and saying, I heard that you were sick, dude. Can we get you groceries? I didn't hear that. I didn't see that. There was none of that. Because you don't care. You don't care about your fellow man. You care about your rights when they're inconvenienced. That's it. And you call yourself patriots. You see, right now is the time to be standing together. If you own a building and there's a restaurant in it, and that restaurant doesn't have the money to pay rent, then don't charge them rent. Become a part of that community. And when things go back, help them. It's going to bless your building because you got somebody who can pay rent, but that's not the way people think. The people don't work together. They don't stand together. That's why these protests are so loose, is because it's all about my inconvenience. It's not about people are not going out, and it's not for the right reasons. It's not about us. It's not about the we. And I'm not talking about the groupthink of the left. I'm talking about the group of free thinkers standing together. That's not what it's about. And you may argue with me, but here your argument stops as soon as I say, what were you doing about this 3 months ago, 6 months ago? You weren't doing anything about it. So your argument stops right there. Well, we can't, we're being told to stay home and our businesses are failing. Why weren't you insisting 6 months ago that if a pandemic or a national crisis or act of God or anything, war ever broke out, does the government have a plan? Can we count on the government not going after our Bill of Rights when we are in a incident, a crisis situation? You didn't do that 6 months ago. You didn't do it a year ago. You didn't do it 10 years ago. Why? Because it wasn't on your mind, because you weren't being inconvenienced. That's why. So I hope after all this is over with, that you all will look to people, to each other, and come up with a plan. We can say all we want about government agencies. They're complete failure on every level. Pandemics are things that come and go in history. Why didn't we have a plan for it? Why? Because we promote incompetent people just like we elect incompetent people. And the system needs to be fixed, or it's not going to get any better. The government is a failure. Why? Because you don't stand together for the right reasons on a regular day. That is why. And I think that is probably a good place to stop. By the way, the other tragedy in this is that because I'm so bored at home, I was going to buy a virtual reality headset. You practically can't get them. And now everybody's scalping them. They're so expensive. I mean, that's the one thing that I could do is sit here and fly around or shoot bad guys in virtual reality, but I can't even do that. Guess I'll have to keep writing. Anyway, listen, one thing you got to take away from this is that I love all of you. I care greatly about this country. And I want you to have information that's real. I hope this challenged you, but I know there's going to be a lot of people that are not challenged by this, or just they don't like the fact that I called people out. But the reality is, I love this country. I'm a devout patriot. I've served through blood, sweat, and tears for you. And I'm telling you, the country and freedom were founded by fighters, but it's going to be sustained by the commitment of the people. That's the truth. I'm Jonathan Gilliam. This is The Experts. The truth has arrived. God bless you. And we're out of here.